Back on Course Record, I'm Michael Breed, joined now by the man who did all the work at Southern Hills. He likes to call, what is it, Gil, that you call yourself the chief bulldozing officer? What is it?
Yeah, chief bulldozing operator.
Gil Hanse, my guest today on Course Record. And Gil, your work here at Southern Hills was plentiful. You had a lot of things that you were trying to do. I'll start with this. What was your goal when you were asked, hey, come in here, we've got a PGA coming up here, we need you to do a little work to the golf course. Give me an idea of what your mindset was as you set out to redo the golf course.
Well, thanks for having me on, Michael. Actually, when we were doing the work, we didn't know there was a PGA Championship coming. We kind of knew there was one on the long-term horizon, but obviously it moved up a lot quicker to be hosting this year. I think the thing we looked at with Southern Hills, as with most of these great old golf courses that we're entrusted with, was the original designer. And here it was Perry Maxwell. It was our first opportunity to work on a Maxwell golf course. We've never done a course of his before, so we had a lot to learn. We had a lot to catch up on. So we felt like because of the history of the championships that were hosted there was tons of opportunity, for the golf course to be challenging for today's players. So we didn't really focus so much on that. Sure, we added some length here and there, but it was just how can we get back Perry Maxwell's, the roll-offs to the sides of the greens, get the bunkering back and to be reconfigured to look a lot more like the rustic character of his original bunkering, removing some trees, both from an agronomic perspective and an architectural perspective. And I think the thing that's been most noticeable to players who've played there, back in 2007, last time the PGA Championship was there, and now is the reintroduction of creeks through the property. The original design, Maxwell had these creeks running naturally through the site. He had them all open, and they were an integral part of the strategy. For whatever reason, over a period of time, they've been piped under fairways and covered over. And so now they're going to be a big part of what these guys are facing.
Give me an idea of the research that you're going to do in preparation for a redesign on Perry Maxwell golf course that you've never really done any work on Perry Maxwell golf courses.
So the club's Clyde Christman is the club historian, and he dove into the archives and gave us all kinds of great information. The golf course was built in 1936 in the heart of the Depression, one of only a couple golf courses built at that point in time. So it was newsworthy from the construction, but it was also newsworthy because of the aspirations of the club. And then they hosted major championships, in the 1950s. So we had some decent documentation. And then there's a guy named Chris Clauser who wrote a book called The Midwest Associate about Perry Maxwell. So we studied that and then went to his home course that he built on his own property at Dornick Hills in Ardmore, Oklahoma. So there were a few pilgrimages and a few opportunities to dive in and do as much research as possible. But ultimately, Clyde was a godsend as far as the information he had.
Perry Maxwell is known for making these very interesting green complexes, surrounds. Give us an idea of what you all did there to bring these back to their original contours and shapes.
I think the internal contours were all pretty much intact. What we looked at was really the edge conditions. So I think most of our work, or at least the changes that we made, were around the edges of the greens in order to get the balls to roll where they would normally roll. And the other part of the design we found from the old aerial photographs is there was a ton of short grass out there. Southern Hills had always been known for its major championships, a lot of heat. And then really thick rough and slick greens. And so now you're going to notice this year, not a ton of rough. Balls are actually going to move away so they're not just going to roll off the edge and then sit right there. They're going to actually roll off and they're going to go into some places where I think the creativity of these players is really going to be tested.
Let's talk about the collaboration that you might have, not just with Southern Hills, but also too with the PGA of America and specifically Kerry Haigh. Do you bring any of those outside agencies of the PGA into this to get an idea of what they're going to try to do in their setup? Or do you this is exclusively for Southern Hills and we really want to make this the way it was for this membership?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter. We're trying to give Kerry as many options. Jim Wagner, my partner, and I, when we go into these projects, it's really focused on the original architect, like at Wingfoot. It was all about Tillinghast and giving John Bodenhammer and the USGA all kinds of variety for the US Open setup there. Same thing with Kerry is if we do our job right, and if Perry Maxwell did his job right, which he definitely did, then we're ultimately giving Kerry a big toolbox that he can utilize. He can react to conditions. He can react to, I don't think he reacts to scoring all that much, but he can react to the wind and the firmness. And if he has options as opposed to being forced into one or two hole locations on a green, I think that gives him the opportunity. And he also now, I think I read somewhere that, the last time major championship was played there was 6,900 yards, and now it's 7,500 yards. So he'll also have flexibility based on wind, which looks like this on the forecast is going to be a big part of the story this week. He's got the flexibility to move and to react to conditions. And I think if we give Kerry that opportunity, then he's great at what he does. So we'll have done our job, and he'll certainly do his well.
And talk about, as you bring a golf course back to its original construction, there's green speeds that you have to be mindful of, and certainly when you're doing the work that you're doing around the greens, the green speed is a big part of it. So as you're doing the work to those greens, those Maxwell greens, are you thinking in your mind, hey, we have to be able to make these greens work at a 12 or 13 or 14 on the stimp? Or are you kind of, hey, this is the original property, let's keep it at that, and again, member play maybe 11 or near 11?
Yeah, it's a fine line we walk there. Russ Myers, the golf course superintendent, is amazing at his job, and I'm sure whatever Kerry asks him to do, he'll be able to deliver on that. Our fallback is always to defer to the original architecture. I think, if I were to ask you what are your favorite set of greens in the world, it's highly unlikely you're going to name a modern golf course. You're going to name Pinehurst or Augusta or Winged Foot or Pine Valley. And so if we hold those to be the standard of greatness, why would we try to defer or change those in a way that would ultimately downplay the architecture in favor of trying to maintain some sort of level of speed? So our preference is always to go architecture first. Now, at Southern Hills, I'm sure you'll remember, back in, I think it was 2001 U.S. Open, they had the 9th and the 18th greens were maintained at 2 feet slower on the stimp meter. So we did look at making some alterations there to create some better hole locations. I think our goal is to get the golf course to play consistently. And if, you've got 2 greens, I think that calls unnecessary attention to those 2 greens versus, hey, all 18 greens are presented in one fashion. So yes, we will very carefully nip and tuck if we need to try and create more valid hole locations for today's speed. But for the most part, we're really looking at the original contours.
What is the challenge that you face, or maybe the biggest challenge that you face with a redesign for a golf course that is for member play, but also too for championship play? Are there certain nuances that you have to include in your redesign, or do you just let the golf course speak for itself?
I think for the most part, we're going to trust the original architects. Those guys were so good at what they did. So while we architects take the bows and take a lot of credit, at the end of the day, it's the setup. It's Kerry Haig's setup of the golf course is going to determine the scoring. It's Russ Myers' presentation of the golf course based on Mother Nature. It's a hard thing for some golf architects, myself included, occasionally, just sort of have to sit back and go, okay, we did our job, now let's just watch the show. But I think that there is the opportunity, if you're thoughtful, that you can create golf courses that are going to be playable and enjoyable for the membership and yet challenging for the best players in the world.
Gil, we can't wait to watch the show that will be the PGA Championship. Appreciate the time today, and I'll look forward to seeing you down there in Tulsa